Hello quilty friends and welcome back to my channel. My name's Rachel and I make videos about quilting and my creative life. And on today's video I'll be showing you how I made this gorgeous rag quilt. This rag quilt is one of the Christmas gifts that I've been making, so this is all done. I just need to add a quilt label to it and it'll all be ready for the recipient. If you would like to stay up to date with any of my other quilting and sewing endeavours, you can find me elsewhere on the web, and those are all listed down in the description box below. I'll be bringing you along with me step by step so that you can make your very own rag quilt. I will just touch on a few things before we get into the tutorial, and these are just important to note about how I got the results that I did. So first off, I've used a very lightweight denim. I think it was a 4 ounce. I bought it from Empress Mills. I'll leave the link in the description box below, but they do different colours that you can purchase. Different shades of blue denim. It was really easy to sew through on my machine, but I did make sure to use a denim needle, and then I've just used matching thread. When you purchase from Empress Mills, you can select the option to get a matching thread and they'll colour match it for you. I also had a layer cake of batik fabrics. Now batiks is a very tight weave fabric. It's 100% cotton, but it's known for not fraying very much because it's got that tight weave. But I knew that denim would fray a lot because denim just does, doesn't it? So in my mind that overcompensated a little bit for the batik not fraying very much. But what I also decided to do is not use wadding on this quilt. For my layer inside of the fabrics, I've actually used a brushed cotton bed sheet, which again I knew would fray down nicely because it's a bit of an open weave type of fabric, and it would create these really lush and thick fraying seams on the front. And this is after washing, because washing is an important step with a rag quilt. And just looking at the seams now, the batiks haven't frayed very much at all. They've sort of just curled and things. They've gone a little bit fluffy around the edge, but they haven't frayed and produced typical fraying. So if you were to use different fabrics or not use the denim, you might get a different result. If you don't want to use a sheet inside, like a flannel sheet or anything, you can use wadding, but you just have to cut the wadding smaller because you don't want the wadding to show on the outside, because wadding doesn't fray. There are lots of cheat sheets that you can get on Pinterest. If you just search for rag quilt cheat sheet, I'll try and leave the link to one down below, and it will actually tell you how many squares you need, and that will be front and back. And then if you want to put something in the middle, you'll just need to do the calculations for that. But anyway, let's get into the footage and show you how I made this. So my front and back on some of the squares is the same. So this will be the back. We'll put that face down first, and then because I'm using the cotton flannel, just lay that over the top. It doesn't have to be perfect here, it's too short, but there on the back it's too long. As long as you're getting it generally equal, it doesn't matter. And then you want to lay your top fabric face up, so you're making a small quilt sandwich for every single one of these. The amount that you have to make will vary depending on how big your squares are. Just smooth it all out, and then all we're going to do is run it through the sewing machine. You can do chain piecing on this, but I'm actually going to push this one out and then push my next one under, just so it's gone under by about 1/4 of an inch, so you're not sewing straight onto the corner there, because after you do a few, you'll see that it will chew up if you do that. So just move it in just a touch. I've got matching thread on the top and in the bobbin, and I've got a stitch length of 4, and you're just going to sew diagonally. I don't bother marking it, I just completely eyeball it. And then once you've done in one direction, you do the quilting in the opposite direction. Don't worry if you see these bits of wrinkles and things, it will all just work out just fine. You can see here that I have got quite a bit of overhang there. That is probably a little bit too much. I'll have to trim that down. But you're going to join these with a generous seam allowance, and then all of these seams will fray. So the more you have, the more fraying you'll have. And then all you need to do from there is just repeat the same process as many times as you need to. You don't need to mark this line, you can just eyeball it, doesn't matter if it's slightly off. Just try and be as accurate as you can. I opted to cut my denim squares into 9-inch squares, and then the batiks with the layer cake I actually cut it into 4, generating them into 5-inch squares, because when I joined them into a 4 patch they turn into a 9-inch 4 patch, because you actually join with a 1/2-inch seam allowance. So this is made up of 9-inch squares, not 10. So the quilt design that I've opted for with these batiks is a simple 4 patch, and then that will be alternated with just a plain denim square. So I joined these together as a test just to see if I got all of my maths correct, and I'm happy to report I did. I've also done a little practice on the fraying just so I can see how it all cuts up and things like that. So let me show you how to join these, and then you'll see how the whole quilt top comes together so easily. So I'm just joining together fairly random, so I'm just going to pick 2 random colours. I'm going to lay them all out and get into a good production line once I've done this little bit. So unlike a regular quilt, normally in quilting you would put that together right sides and then sew here, but in this case you actually want to put them wrong sides together because the seam is going to be on the front. So you just match them up. And again, it is very forgiving. So here the inside is poking out very slightly. You don't need to worry about that because when it all frays up, it will all just blend together. So you want to put them wrong sides together. And then on your sewing machine, still with a walking foot, you're going to join them with a 1/2-inch seam allowance. So for me, the 1/2-inch, when I've got my walking foot on, the 1/2-inch is just the center position on the needle. But you'll need to check your machine. Your stitch length will be back to your standard length now. And again, you can chain piece these together, but just for the demonstration, I'll break them apart. There we go. And then you'll have your seam on the front, like so. And then here's one that I prepared earlier, and I'll show you how to join the 4 together. So again, put them wrong sides together. And you can pin if you want to with this, but it is quite forgiving, but you still want to nest your seams because you're going to be sewing through a lot of layers here. So you will need a denim needle on and try and take it as slowly as possible. And then this is how these will look when they're joined. The seams will be sewn down, but when we're trimming it, I'll show you how to release those seams. And there you go. So I think I've got a production line that I need to get started joining all of these stacks together. So I'm going to lay out all of the colours so that I can pick from each pile to make sure that each one of those 4 patches have a good distribution of colour throughout. And of course, if you're using scraps for this project, you can also do a similar thing to make sure you get a good distribution. Or when I've made rag quilts in the past, I've actually laid it out and stacked all of the squares together to make sure I get a good distribution that way. I would also like to take a moment to thank today's video sponsor, which is Skillshare. And Skillshare is the largest online learning platform for creatives like me and you. When I'm doing lots of chain piecing like this, I like to sit, just with my iPad just in front of me here, and I put on a Skillshare workshop. And Skillshare has so many online classes in so many different subjects as well, from things like sewing, quilting, creative subjects such as art and design, and even things like cooking, which I've been enjoying recently. And what I really like about the online classes is that you can stop them at any time, pause them if you get to a part where you really need to concentrate on the sewing, which is what I usually do, and just pick them back up so you can learn at your own pace and for the things that you're interested in. My sister has also been taking some Skillshare classes because she's really getting into watercolour painting. So the next time I go around to my sister's, I'll take some photos of what she's been painting and share those with you over on Instagram. If you would also like to try Skillshare, the first 500 people to sign up with the link in the description will receive 1 month free of Skillshare access. So check it out and see what you can learn. Or if you're already on Skillshare and you've done some of the courses, leave me some of your recommendations. And then what I did from here is I joined 2 pieces together. So we've got a 4 patch and then we've got just this plain one that I have also quilted. So those are just going together in pairs. And that just looks like this. You've got the 1/2 inch seam allowance in the middle. And this gave me a whole stack of these pairs put together. And it's at this point that I'm going to lay them out on the floor and then finalise a design, just to make sure I've got a nice even distribution of colours in this section here, not too much of one focused in one area. And you can do that trick of putting the photo into black and white, just so you can be sure, because there are some quite dark ones and some quite bright ones. I don't want to have big groups of those together if I can help it. And then what I'll do from there is I'll then join the rows together. So there'll be the rows that I'm going to do is an 8 by 10 layout. So it'll be 8 squares. So 4 pairs will make the row of 8 across, and then there'll be 10 repeats of those. And then all I'm going to do is just join them in the exact same way, putting them wrong sides together and joining with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then once you've got the configuration and you've sewn them all together, that is the quilt top done. We'll then just need to focus on making the rag part. So let me get that joined and we'll come back once that's done. So what we need to do once you've pieced your whole top together, then have to do a lap of honour or a lap of victory round the quilt twice. So what that means is stitching the very same seam around the very edge, because this quilt isn't going to have any binding on. So you want to make sure that where all of the pieces intersect is nice and strong, but also you're going to fray the edge as well. So you want to make sure that you've got a seam there to protect it from fraying back and falling apart essentially. So just with a regular stitch length, just go all the way around the edge twice. It can be a bit long and arduous doing this step, but it does work out okay. With your walking foot on, it will make light work of it. And it doesn't need to be 100% straight, the seam. It doesn't matter if you go in or out or just wobble a little bit, because you're not going to notice much anyway. There'll be fluffy fraying stuff covering the outer edge anyway, so don't worry about it too much. Mine has come in a little bit, out a little bit, but I'm not going to be too precious about it, as long as it's matching thread. So once we've done that, that's my seam line there. It doesn't always sit on top of each other, but I tried to get it as close as I could on most occasions, and that will just help strengthen it. Now we need to start cutting the seams. I did already do this on quite a few, but it's best to do the edge stitch first. I avoided all of these ones until I'd done the edge stitch. So what we're looking to do is cut into the seam, but not right the way down to the edge of the seam, and that's the type of distance that you want to be cutting them apart. I bought some spring-loaded scissors from Amazon. I'll leave the link to these in the description, and these just make it easier on your hand. It's a slightly different cutting motion, so all we're going to do is just snip into it, and this will just really help it fray. So once you've cut it, you'll have to wash it. So before you put it in the wash, just make sure that you have cut all the seams, because it'll be really obvious if there's one that you haven't cut. And when you get to somewhere like this and you've sewn it down, what you want to do is you want to put your scissors in and release that. Might be a bit hard to go through all the layers, but just pull it out to release it, so that then it will fluff up there as well. And then you just repeat the same process. These scissors don't like going through 4 layers. You want it about 1/4 inch apart, no more than 1/2 inch, because then you wouldn't get good fraying then. So just continue on with this and just go steady, and take as many evenings as you need to do it, because it can be tiring on your hands. So just be careful of that and be mindful. But yeah. All I've been doing as well is, if I accidentally cut through the seam, I'm putting a safety pin there to mark it, and then reinforcing that seam, because you don't want anything to be unraveling. So do be careful not to be cutting through any stitching. These scissors are better cutting further down than at the tip. So what I've been doing is being very careful and not closing my scissors all the way, but you do have to be careful. But it makes it a little bit quicker. You don't need the spring-loaded scissors, it just makes it easier. This is how your seams will look once you've snipped them all through. You'll see that some threads start to come off, but there won't be any major fraying at this point. As I said, just give it a very thorough check over to make sure that you've cut all of the seams. Even though I thought I had, I did actually leave 3 of the seams unclipped when I actually put it through the wash. And this is how your quilt will look once it's washed. I really like how full all of the seams are, and I think that is down to the denim. Lots of pieces of fabric will shed from the quilt when you wash it, so ideally you want to wash it inside of another duvet case to catch all of those, to stop them clogging up your washing machine filter, and make sure that you give it a good shake outside before putting it in the tumble dryer. As you can see here, the denim did shrink in the wash, but I really like the effect that has given to the whole quilt. I did take my quilt to the laundrette just because they've got bigger machines, and I didn't have any issues with that. I did only tumble dry it for 15 minutes, and then I left it to air dry at home just because I was worried about how hot their tumble dryers would be. Look how fluffy this thing is. Isn't that amazing? And that's how the back looks. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video watching me make this rag quilt. I really enjoyed the process. It was very fun to make. Now the rag quilt, because the quilt will be essentially quilt as you go and fully assembled, what I actually did was when I was joining the quilt rows together, I did them in two halves. So I had the top half of the quilt completely sewn and then the bottom half of the quilt, and then I put those two together and joined it, so that the only time that I had the full weight of the quilt was that last seam that I did, because otherwise by the time you get to the halfway point it starts getting really heavy and you're constantly like pulling and pushing it through the machine. So the easiest way to do it is just do it in two halves, so you're not manipulating the whole weight of the quilt constantly through the machine. If you have any questions at all about the process of making a rag quilt, please just leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you as quickly as I can. But until now, you take care and I wish you a very Merry Christmas. Bye!